All right. So follow up from last meeting. So checking in on the PG11 rollout. We have a current target date, May 9th. That's awesome. There any other updates on that one, Jose?
Yes, so we executed the first test end-to-end last Friday, was successful. And we are attempting tomorrow to do another test. And as Alberto mentioned it, the date is from the May 9th of May that we will execute in production. This is the target.
Actually, I did have a question about that. So is May 9th, I think someone said May 9th and then Sunday, but May 9th is actually a Saturday. So is it Sunday in Europe, but sorry, what's the date? Because May 9th is a Saturday, but I think in the issue it does say Sunday.
As far as I know, the maintenance will be executed in PST time. Well, the mentioned time will be on a Sunday, yes.
Okay.
That's my knowledge.
That's probably May 10th then. And Giannis, last week we talked about getting someone from the database team to cover. Giannis volunteered to cover because it's middle of the day for him. If it's 2 a.m. PST, it's like noon in Greece for him. So he said he can easily cover it for us if we need any database expertise. All right. Anything else to cover on that? I think that is a no. So last week, what happened? We had some more meetings to talk about. There was some concerns that the consensus was service extraction. Sid had some concerns for sure, and we had a meeting. There's a YouTube live stream of it there, and the big driver is called out at that 1440 times. So the big driver we have behind sales and IACV is that we are a single application, single data store. And the concern with moving forward on service extraction was that we can no longer say that, right? We lose a big market if we start having multiple services, multiple databases. So continuing to focus, the request was to continue to focus on database sharding and to do some prototypes. And after, sorry, been a lot of conversations over the last couple of days. So we talked further about what that means to do prototyping. There is a story in the handbook in the database team that I need to link that I did not do, where Andreas has done some work on what partitioning looks like at the issue level and what performance gains that we see and what some of the concerns are on cross-partition joins. So I will add that in here. So we do have some data on prototypes that we've done in the past. There's still some concerns about, I guess, migrations for having everything in a single database, what we can shard, what we can't shard. And what we talked about just literally a half hour ago is continuing to talk about what were some of the goals of service extraction and how we can bring that into this single application and single database. And the term that Andreas came up with was identifying and isolating the access pattern, so we can understand where we would be inefficient with sharding right now based on the access patterns. And namespace was a good example, because we'll see some advantages to sharding at the namespace level, but things like users will not work very well with sharding. So how do we isolate users and make it shardable within the confines of single application, single database? So Andreas quickly put this issue together here under what's happening next, so we could start brainstorming and thinking about the various isolation patterns that we would need to implement to be able to properly shard the database and have that horizontal scalability that we're looking for as the ultimate outcome of this working group and database sharding. So I'm sure there are a ton of questions, and a lot of my answers will be, I don't know yet, because a lot of this just happened like within the last 8 working hours, a lot of these discussions. So there's more to come on this discussion, but are there questions that people have top of mind?
Have we looked at the group managed accounts as saying that whether it will or won't be effective in helping shard or partition at the namespace level? It's a new feature that the manage team is building, or maybe the access team. Well, I guess manage access, that is intended to provide more of an isolated user account system for namespaces on GitLab.com.
I don't know. I would doubt it if it's a new feature. It's probably something we have not looked at. I don't know, Andreas.
No, we don't. We haven't looked at it. But that sounds very useful.
Do you have any issues for that we can look at, Josh?
Yeah, 1 second. I'll just paste it into the agenda here.
Is that access isolation though, as opposed to system isolation?
It's intended to provide a separate, like isolated account for the namespace so that they have full control over it. So I'd imagine there would be a column which specifies the namespace that the user account belongs to, if it exists. If that makes sense. But basically, you can think of one problem it's trying to solve, which is you're a part of a company account, say GitLab. You have a global user account on GitLab.com. You take a private repository, you fork it. It's now in your personal namespace, and you can then potentially make it public or do whatever you want with it. Or you upload something else to your personal namespace or something like that. And so previously, on a self-managed instance, the admins would have full control over all personal namespaces on the instance. And with GitLab.com, it's not true. And so as you fork things in your personal namespace, they essentially lose control over them. And their only recourse is like DMCA takedown requests. It's like not good. So this provides more of a fully managed corporate account on GitLab.com to help solve some of these challenges.
And would users in that account only see data of their group or their organization?
I think they would also be able to see the other public groups, but they would be attached or associated with the namespace. So I'm just wondering, like, there might be a partitioning column for the user on the namespace identifier, for example. So I'm sorry, I got to a group, an old stale epic. I'm trying to find the feature here. I'll share it once I do.
Yeah, I guess one of the problems that we have is that there is no notion of an organization yet in GitLab, the application. So we have many users, and they can all participate in basically all the namespaces they have access to, including the public ones. And that sort of makes it hard to shard by an organization because we don't have that. But if we had the opportunity or the possibility to create users that only have access to their organization, to the repositories, containers, issues, merge requests of their organization, then it would be much easier to shard by that dimension. And that's also what we talk about when we talk about access patterns to the data. So I think it makes sense to figure out what kind of access patterns we have today. One of these is obviously by namespace. So because a lot of features and their data is inside a namespace, and that aligns naturally. But there are other data access patterns where you come in with your user. You want to see all your assignments, for example, and I think we should figure out those access patterns and figure out how to isolate them, because that enables us to actually apply a sharding technique later.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, it's so basically it's from looking at it, I linked under what's been done. I guess it's probably not the best place to link it, maybe what's coming next. But check it out. It's already added in for a little bit of time. It actually looks like 12.1 seems old. But there's more coming here. I'll try and find a better epic. but the idea is that it essentially prevents them from sharing things outside the top level namespace. And so I think they can't share anything outside of it, but they can access other public projects across the database or across the instance, as anyone would be able to. But I would think with namespace sharding though, I mean, even though it's sharded, we would still need to be able to cross-access things, right? Like
Yeah,
issues or anything.
Yeah, we'll get some more concrete next steps in this issue below on what we're trying to identify, how we're going to go about identifying it, what we think is shardable, what we think we need to change to be more shardable. So there's a lot of work that happens with a slightly directional change. So I wish I had more information, but there was just a lot that came down over the last couple of days. So that's where we are.
Do we know from a high level what type of data can be sharded? Say they have to, for example, we break down two organizations into two shards. Is there anything that needs to be in a common table that is not in those isolated charts?
Yeah, perhaps.
Go ahead, Andres.
Perhaps it makes sense to talk about an example. We used issues quite a lot in recent examples. So we have issue data, descriptions and all that, with comments on that. And this is always inside a namespace, right? An issue can't live outside a namespace. So you could think that, sure, we can shard by the namespace in this case, because this is always available. And then you come in with the right sharding key and you find your right shard, the right namespace, and that's all fine. But then you also have the problem that you have user assignments. So issues can be assigned to users, and users is something that is global. And we have routes or features where you can display your the issues that are assigned to your user. And there you come in with a user as sort of the scope of the search, and that's different than when you come in with a namespace. So in this case, you don't have a namespace available, and that doesn't align with the namespace sharding very well. So that's what we mean when we say that some things are not shardable. It's not that because the data is not shardable, but because we have these conflicting access patterns where you want to have one perspective and you also want to have the other. And we need to figure out how to isolate that. And one thing that has been brought up was service extraction. You could think that you extract that into a service and isolate it that way. But it could also mean that we only isolate it on the code base. So it doesn't have to be a service, could also just be a module in the code base with the proper interface to hide that from you. And then ultimately we may be able to apply namespace sharding to all the things, because this is where actually the majority of the data lives once we have sort of removed those conflicting access patterns. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think we will probably uncover more cases coming from the top down. So yeah, it does sound that there's a lot more to uncover here.
Yeah, totally. For example, we also have global search, and CI has a global scope as well, if I understand it correctly. To-dos are user-based, so it's not that everything resides in a namespace. So there's more of these. Yeah.
I think the term "not shardable" is probably a bit of a misnomer, right? We could shard the database in various and spectacularly bad ways. It's just not performant, not scalable to shard it in some of the ways that we're talking about. So the goal of the access isolation is to make it to where it's actually performant and provides value by scaling horizontally and avoids a lot of these known pitfalls like the cross shard joins. So
just a idea from my side. Thanks, Josh, for sharing the group search partitioning, or the group managed accounts. One piece of advice I'd give is if we need to just pick on one thing to shard on, just as for the prototyping, for the proof of concept, right? Like just know the team has that flexibility to use that as an iteration. know that there's a lot of complexities, know there's going to probably be some way that we're going to have to change it. But like, if it's just to get kind of the vet that of saying, okay, here's how the application is going to have to change, you know, or here's where we're going to have to go implement new code because we're going to have to work cross shards. That's the point. That's the intent of the proof of concept, right? Is to uncover that level of work associated with it. Which what I don't want the team to get hung up on too much is exactly which form to shard on, unless like, you know, the first one they try is really bad, in which case that's a good iteration to then say, okay, now we're going to try this one, right? That's for sure.
Yeah, and I probably didn't advertise it enough, but Andreas did some great work on the issue group search as an example for partitioning. And there's some really good data there on what worked well for partitioning, which would be the logical progression to sharding with foreign data wrappers and Postgres. So we do have some prototyping information there, and we can either iterate on that or take a different example for an iteration. And like I said, we'll discuss further in this issue here.
Yeah,
Cool.
is
And
what we're saying.
go ahead and look at that. Go ahead and look at that feature that Josh provided, because I think that's important for us to recognize. I just don't want it to, if we get hung up on it,
Yep.
Let's have a discussion about it.
That's great. Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, I was just trying to bring it up as a way that some of these global tables might be more easily sharded or partitioned if we start having more namespace information populated in them. Not that it needed to alter or change our partitioning strategy here. But
yeah, it actually made me fearful the opposite, which is we're gonna have customers who are gonna say, actually, I want those on different shards to, you know, because like we've opened up the discussion of, okay, we're sharding. I guarantee one customer is going to come and say, well, actually, I'd want those on two different services, much like AZ's and Amazon, right? So, but that's why I'm trying to keep it simple. That's why I'm not even bringing that up.
I agree. There's been some discussion. If we shard on namespace, then we can somehow, well, it might be an easier path towards data residency, for example, which is, you know, might be true, but isn't.
From an on-prem customer perspective, we're not offering sharding.
Understood. I'm mentioning from like a GitLab.com perspective.
Right, but I was sorry, I was stepping back one previous discussion.
Oh, gotcha.
You're saying hosted would not have sharding?
No, I don't think we have any intention to offer sharding to hosted users.
Yeah, and it's buried in brainstorming comments in some of the recorded videos. So, right, we wouldn't offer it to hosted because we don't have any customers that are to that stage yet. And well, if they
based on our current knowledge, there are no customers that will ever get to that level, because basically our biggest customer fits in with every other GitLab user on a single database right now. So there's basically no use case besides GitLab.com, unless somebody was to create a competitor to GitLab.com, and they can go, like, there is literally no customer that is big enough that could justify a sharding solution.
Yep. Yeah, and the thing that we talked about on the same topic was, you know, we could provide guidance, but we're not going to offer a solution for our self-managed customers.
Yeah. So anyways, real quick, so the issue is that basically is the cross shard joins. Is that what we're trying to avoid here? Almost with the concerns on the users table and things like that.
Yeah, it's just the opposite of the service extraction. At least that's my understanding. So I'm just trying to channel the team to make sure I understand it correctly. But, you know, service extraction causes you to have latency because you have to go to several services to do it. If you shard it improperly, you're going to have to go to several DBs to basically do the same operation. So it can get super cumbersome if you don't do it correctly.
Gotcha. So things that are inherently global, you know, group lists, user accounts, and things like that would be a challenge, and would be, I don't know, we need to figure a way to solve them, keep them all in one shard or something like that.
Correct, or replication with proper, you know, auditing and self-fixing.
Yeah, and that could be
I'm not a big fan of that solution, but that if you need the efficiency, that's what you do.
It could be part of our research too for this isolating access patterns. What areas are affected and what aren't, right? Just so we get a common understanding.
Yeah, it'd be good to know sort of where we think the scaling problems are. Like it sounds like the users table is one that's like cause for concern. I'd be curious to know if it's 5 years, 10 years out from now. And then, you know, whether we think sharding would be a helpful solution to that problem.
Well, I don't think the users table in and of itself is a scaling problem. It's just how it is intertwined with how we would do sharding today, right? And how do we isolate that out so it is more scalable if we need to implement sharding across user information. But
okay, sorry.
Yep.
I'm probably derailing us.
No worries. A lot of questions. It's very complicated, and we've changed directions, I think, every week for the last couple of weeks. So valid questions. Right. And unless there's any other topics on this, so Ben, you are meeting with Cockroach Labs later this week.
Yeah, I have a scheduled meeting tomorrow with Cockroach Labs to talk about how far they've progressed with their Rails adapter and what they've been actually independently looking into how to run GitLab on top of Cockroach DB. So they should be. It's just a quick sync up to see how they're doing with that and see how viable running a GitLab on Cockroach DB is.
Yeah, I think so. Cockroach has been brought up before, and at the moment, it's not seen as a realistic option for us from like scalability and early product standpoint. Which there's a couple issues historically where we've talked about Cockroach in the past, and it was discussed early on in this sharding working group before too. So I'm assuming this is mostly just informational at this point in time. Yeah,
this is just to see, in their opinion, how viable it is, because they've been working on this independent. They have better knowledge of how viable it is as a database, and so it's just and what things they've run into when trying to run GitLab on a Cockroach DB. Gotcha. Okay. Thanks. We are coming up on time. Any other topics that we should cover before we're done? Any questions folks have? I'm not sure about container registry. Dan was in on the call where we talked about having prototypes for that and what they are going to implement and the different options they have on the database side. But I would hesitate to go into further detail because I don't know enough about that to intelligently describe what they're going to work on and where their database lives and does not live. So I will just leave it at they are going to work on some various prototypes for the container registry and how it interacts with our database. All right, if there's nothing else, we have hit the end of the agenda. Thanks, everybody.